Hi, everyone. If you're new here, I'm Christina. I'm a graduate student in journalism and communications, and this is Media Tidbits. So for today's video, I wanted to talk to you more about framing, which is something that I briefly touched on in one of my other videos. If you watched that one, you might remember that I said there is a lot to cover here, and I'm not kidding. So here it goes. This concept is super important in media and comms, and so I want to give you a better understanding of it before my next video because, spoiler, we talk about framing a lot. So that being said, today we're going to go over the importance of not using the opposing side's language, the danger of negating a frame, and why framing shouldn't be confused with spinning. If most of this sounds like gibberish to you, don't even worry about it. By the end of this, you'll be a media pro. So let's get started. In one of my other videos, I mentioned that when two teams are pitted against one another, like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, how these teams frame their messages is super important. But let's use an entirely different example. Let's talk about soccer and the Euro Cup. We're not going to talk about the World Cup for obvious reasons. Anyway, as you may recall, mostly because Italians won't let anyone forget, myself included, Italy won the Euro Cup last year. Many cities with a large Italian population, like Toronto, exhibited the waving of flags and dancing in the streets, celebrations, so to speak. Now, let's suppose the municipal government was displeased with this because it caused traffic jams. To my knowledge, this didn't happen, and the city of Toronto was super supportive, but let's just pretend for a sec that this is the case. So while the Italian community is referring to this as a celebration, which is a super positive way to frame what's happening, the mayor of Toronto, who we're pretending is holding a press conference to address the traffic issue, would not be very likely to call it a celebration because that reinforces the Italian community's messaging. That's the term the Italian community is using, right? And which again, celebration is a very positive and happy event, but traffic jams are not. So instead, again, supposing that the city of Toronto wasn't pleased with the traffic or the commotion, John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, might call what the Italians are doing unsanctioned street parties, right? Different term. So by avoiding the term celebrations and using his term, unsanctioned street parties, instead, the mayor would not be reinforcing the idea that what's going on is a celebration. It's an unsanctioned street party. And it paints what's happening in a negative light, which is exactly the point of what his messaging would be, because unsanctioned street parties causing traffic jams are not positive. They're negative, they're bad, right? Again, this is completely hypothetical. Now, between celebrations or unsanctioned street parties, neither term is wrong, but the term you use entirely depends on which team you're on and what message you're trying to communicate. And that's why the goal is to avoid using the opposite team's terms or language. Otherwise, you risk reinforcing the wrong message. After reading the title of this lesson, did you just think of peanut butter? If so, you pretty much already proved the point I'm about to make. Before we talk about peanut butter, though, let's go back to an example I used in a previous video, one of a victim versus a survivor. Like I mentioned in that video, when we say the word victim, it evokes the image of someone who might be kind of helpless and who went through a really unfortunate experience. If someone says, I am not a victim, what's actually happening is that you're picturing a victim in your head anyway, because they said the word victim. So in other words, negating or denying something, like saying, I am not a victim, only reinforces the message in this case that you're trying not to convey. You don't want people to think of you as a victim, so don't use that word, right? So instead, celebs, companies, brands, movements, politicians, and so forth want to avoid negating a frame as much as possible and instead use the terminology that they feel is best associated with them and the message they want to get across. So in our victim example, let's pretend that the media is referring to you as a victim. And that's not something that you want associated with you. You don't want to use that term in reference to you. And you want to use the term survivor instead. And so if you're in an interview and then someone asks you the question, are you a victim? You should say, no, I'm a survivor. Just like that. And that now you're not negating the frame. You're not saying I'm not a victim. So you're not reinforcing the idea of a victim. Instead, by saying, no, I'm a survivor. You've now evoked a different image, one of a survivor, right? See how that works? And you'll start to notice in pressers that media people use framing pretty often, and negating the frame can affect public opinion. So let's actually go back to the peanut butter example. If I said, don't think about peanut butter, what do you think of? It's likely that peanut butter just crossed your mind. So whether I said, think of peanut butter or don't think of peanut butter, it doesn't really matter. Both results are the same. You're gonna think about peanut butter. So likewise, if someone asked you, do you like peanut butter? And you responded with, I don't like peanut butter. You're reinforcing the frame or image of peanut butter in your audience's mind. If instead you answer this question with something like, no, I like almond butter. Now you've created a new frame in the audience's mind, one of almond butter, and you didn't strengthen the other message. And that's why media teams and spokespeople often avoid negating the frame of something they or their teams disagree with. Now, granted, the topic of nut butter is completely harmless, but this is super important when it comes to more pressing issues like human rights issues or criminal accusations and so forth. So to put it simply, negating the frame, like telling someone not to think of something or denying something, which is what we might see more often in political pressers and things of that nature, only strengthens the other side's message.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
How well did that work out for Nixon? So if all this messaging, key messages, framing, all this stuff, so if all of this is contrived to some degree, you might be thinking that this means every interviewee, every comms director, every politician, every actor, singer, lawyer, whoever, everyone, they're all actually spin doctors. This is not the case. Key messages are supposed to be based on facts and truths. Spinning, however, it's not even just lying. According to the book, In the News, The Practice of Media Relations, the difference between lying and spin is as follows. A liar knows something is false and makes a conscious choice to contradict reality. The spin doctor is simply oblivious to that fact and only wants to put out unsupported arguments. Have you seen unsupported arguments before? Drop me a comment. I want to hear from you. And to be honest, too, spin is often frowned upon in the industry because it's unprofessional, counterproductive, and ethically questionable. Spinning is putting out baseless arguments without anything to back them up, while framing is finding and using the right language to represent your worldview, or the view of whoever's team you're on. So this means Amber Heard's team needs to use phrases in terms that represent her point of view and should avoid using any of the same phrasing as Johnny Depp's team. Otherwise, she reinforces their messaging and vice versa. So in my last video, for example, we saw that Depp's team used the phrase overwhelming victory in reference to the outcome of the defamation suit. Imagine for a second that Amber or her team actually said word for word, this is not an overwhelming victory for Johnny. That would be reinforcing his team's messaging that this was a huge win. Remember, negating the frame is to strengthen and evoke it anyway. It's Depp's worldview that it was an overwhelming win. It's Heard's worldview that it's a setback for women. Neither of those messages are spins unless those arguments are unsupported. Otherwise, those frames are just their truths. And that's what's at the heart of framing messages. So, does this change how you see media communications? Drop me a comment. Let's talk about it.